CSGO, an apology. I reviewed it on the Steam Deck the other week, but got some things wrong. Also, they've updated a bunch of stuff to it since, which may or may not have been influenced by the stuff I said in my previous video. Long story short, CSGO on the Steam Deck now is better than it was before. And I know more about it now too, thanks to some of you telling me where I was going wrong. In my previous video on it, I said there was a really cool way of aiming on the Steam Deck's controller using something called Flick Stick, that they had turned off by default in CSGO after an update. That is true. But I showed a very roundabout way of enabling it again, when there is, in fact, a much easier and better way. You simply go to the controller options in CSGO, where you can then enable it again and configure everything to your heart's content. I'm still doubtful that anybody knows what they really want from all these specific controls, but it's nice to have the power to change anything you disagree with. You can even disable Flick Stick specifically when you're scoped in, which reverts it back to standard joystick controls instead for when you're only needing to do very small adjustments to your aim. Of course, having never used a controller in a first-person shooter game before, especially one as experimental and as PC-like as the Steam Deck, it didn't even cross my mind to check the controller menu for Steam Deck support. Since so little is designed or optimized for this device right now, when I do run into problems, I immediately resort to the Steam Deck's universal force the controls to change menu, without even considering that a game might have its own menu and support for it already. So it's not like I got it wrong, it did still work, but there is an easier and much better way of configuring the Flick Stick from within CSGO's options menu. The other thing I got wrong, and this time I did get it properly wrong, was this bit, the L2 button, which is apparently used to crouch, to walk, and to scope. And I've tested this several times just to make sure I wasn't being stupid. But no, it's the controls that are stupid. But I was being stupid. I assumed that these trigger buttons, like the other buttons on the Steam Deck, had different functions if you tapped or held down the buttons, and that's what this half-shaded icon meant. But it doesn't mean that. You can probably guess what a half-shaded icon means. It's pretty obvious now that I know, it means to half pull the trigger down. So yeah, I was being stupid, and of all the things I tested, it didn't even cross my mind that different levels of force would trigger different actions on a button. Again, probably because I'm familiar with a mouse and keyboard, instead of the softer, spongier nature of console controllers. I take full responsibility for getting that wrong, but I do still think it's bad practice to have a button serve two different purposes, separated only by how far you press it in. If there was a click and some pressure midway through the pull, it would improve this, but when I'm under pressure or taken by surprise, I don't know if I'll have the resolve to carefully pull a button only by a very small amount. Analog controls like this excel for variable stuff like aiming or moving, but not so much for trying to get two uses out of a single button. Or in this case, 3. But you know what's even worse than that? It's that Valve knows how stupid I am, because as part of CSGO's update the other week, Valve changed this button to no longer crouch your character. And I fear that could have been because they saw my video, facepalmed at how I hadn't figured something simple out, and decided it was better just to remove it than to try and re-educate all 100,000 people or so who saw that video. I'm normally sad that they don't say thanks 3Clicks Philip after changing something that I've pointed out, but in this case, I'm very grateful. And sorry. But also not. Because, having been there and seen people acting stupid on something that I've made, the stuff I pointed out was valuable feedback. Yes, I was technically wrong, but it showed that it wasn't intuitive to me, and hopefully by making these changes to the control system, Valve hasn't just made it easier for me, but also for others, who have picked up the Steam Deck for the first time, and who would also have made the same assumptions and mistakes. Let's go back in time. Back to the developer commentary for Half-Life 2, where Valve mentioned they had to keep toning down their puzzles because a lot of the playtesters didn't get it. When I played the game, I didn't have any trouble, so I just assumed that all of the playtesters were stupid. But maybe it was because I played the toned down version that I felt that way. Maybe, had I played one of the earlier versions, then I'd have been one of those stupid people who missed something obvious, simply because Valve hadn't made it even more obvious. In Half-Life Alyx, there's this bit. You see some creepy floating things making the shape of an eye, then you reach this. I, in my usual semi-speedrun state, missed all of these subtle cues and hints that Valve had laid out to show me what I had to do, and then I wasted far too much time running about wondering what the hell I was doing in that area. What can I say? It's easy once you know how. And I don't think all of the problems that I was having with the Steam Deck were from me being silly. In the latest update to the game, a lot of the tweaks addressed genuine problems and silly oversights that I had with the controls. The biggest is that they've reconfigured quite a lot of the controls, spreading them across more of the buttons on the controller, and with fewer buttons now serving two different purposes. There isn't a dedicated button for changing teams anymore, unless I'm being really stupid, can't rule that out here, but it can easily be done from the in-game menu, so that doesn't really matter. Also, the gyro control, that's the thing where you aim by literally moving the Steam Deck about, can also be made to only be active under certain circumstances, like when you're not using another method of aiming, or when you hold down the scope button. I did say in my previous video that having two methods of aiming sometimes worked against each other, but I hope they didn't change it solely for me, because it's not like I'm the most experienced Steam Deck user to literally change games for. But while you're listening, Valve, this change is cool and stuff, but I wish you could settle on a universal method of controlling your games. The little demo game that Valve made for the Steam Deck where you test toilets has it where you need to put your thumb on this knob to activate the gyro. You don't have to move the knob about, it's just that the knob's touch sensitive, letting you shake your device about and point it wherever you want to come to. So yeah, settle on a fixed control system, Valve, and build a standardized control system for the Steam Deck, rather than having everybody relearn a tool for every game. I also commented on how your movement speed varies depending on how far you push the movement button across, to which Valve has added a walk cutoff, which configures how far you have to push the knob before you begin running and making a noise. I didn't have a problem with how it was before, and all of this new stuff is completely optional and configurable. No complaints here. And the radial menus now all work with the gyro feature. Different menus are still controlled using different knobs, but practice will make perfect. I want you to take away from this video that the Steam Deck's controls in CSGO weren't as silly as I first thought they were, and an update since has made them even less silly, and even more foolproof. And I suggest that in Valve-made games, before you try to force a workaround, it's probably a good idea to see if they have built-in support for the Steam Deck in the options menu. Following this advice will make your life easier. And Valve's.